What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 39, and I am the host, Kyle Angelone. I'm solo on today's show, day after Thanksgiving. Hope everybody had a nice meal yesterday and that you congregated with as many people that you felt comfortable getting together with. And the closest thing to a holiday that we could imagine this year. And we all need those, nice days of spending time doing like just regular things, watching football, though the football was pretty rough yesterday. But yeah, I mean, we also got some big news from the president yesterday. We got some just big news from Biden this week about his cabinet. So I'm getting to all that on today's show. Just first, make sure you share the show. If you're, on Facebook or social media, find the show on Twitter at con_interest or myself, Kyle Anselone _, or on Facebook at Conflicts of Interest, or you could just friend me on Facebook. And make sure you hit the share button on the show to get it out to more people. It's also published at the Libertarian Institute and gets published on all the Libertarian Institute social media feeds. Best place to share the show from, though, is YouTube or the show page on the Libertarian Institute, because it has the YouTube video. But that way people get the video content with the news ticker and the stories that I'm going to talk about. So with that, let's start getting into it. I mentioned that it seems like we got some big news from Trump yesterday. It's certainly being interpreted as the closest thing we're going to get to a concession from the president. He basically acknowledged that if the Electoral College votes him or Biden to be the president, then he will leave the White House. This is not, I guess, the same thing as saying that I lost the election and, America should move on under President Biden. But it is, what Donald Trump is going to say. And look, the standard of what it means to concede has certainly eroded over the past few years. And I mean, right up to the Electoral College, they were really trying to remove or keep down Trump from becoming president. Hillary Clinton's acolytes there, and then afterwards they were to get him removed by the 25th Amendment. And so in one sense, it took a few weeks to figure out the election this time around, but in another, there were, a hell of a lot more Democrats this time around who were still, 25th Amendment, brief the Electoral College, give Colin Powell the presidency, crazy things going on. So it's different, but it's the same. It took probably a week longer than I thought. I thought this was going to be all worked out by Thanksgiving. And I thought more Republicans would break rank with Trump publicly. Now, from very early on, Mitch McConnell was saying there's going to be a peaceful transition of power. But Lindsey Graham, somebody who I think is a little bit more of a bellwether Republican kind of guy, I thought he would maybe, come out against Trump after like a week and say the president needs to concede, but he was all on board with this. I also thought more Republicans would kind of be put up against the wall by the media and said like, hey, do you support our democracy or do you support the president? And it really made them decide, and then really bash the ones who went one way versus the other way and stuff like that. And that didn't happen as much as I thought. So it drug out a little bit longer than I thought, but we now have this. As I said on, I believe, Monday's show, whether there's voter conspiracy, fraud, election rigging or not, Donald Trump isn't going to improve it. And so whoever won the election is Joe Biden, just because, that's the narrative, and he now has more votes, and he's going to win by a bigger margin than Trump beat Hillary Clinton by in 2016. And so, look, even if there was a little bit of election rigging or some voter fraud, it doesn't necessarily mean that changes the fact that Joe Biden was, by whatever, standards we hold the election, the choice of the American people. It's very complicated. A ton of people don't vote. So, this being the way we pick a leader, Joe Biden seems to have won that contest. And I made this point not in 2016 because I didn't have a show, but in 2017, that Democrats were complaining about the Electoral College and stuff. They had the rules of the game, and cheating is a part of that game. We all know it. How much different teams cheat, I don't know. In a way, I think Donald Trump's now response here is something like Stacey Abrams, and she was going for a governor, so it's a completely different situation. But it's kind of the same, where he's saying like, well, it wasn't fair, but I lost, and so that's a way to move on with this thing. With that, Trump is going to do some interesting things as, his last couple months in office. I talked about troop withdrawals on the last show. But this one, I think, is an interesting move. And Donald Trump tweeted out, "It is my great honor to announce that General Michael T. Flynn has been granted a full pardon. Congratulations to General Flynn for his and his wonderful family. I know you have a truly fantastic Thanksgiving." Then he retweeted himself saying, "Have a great life, General Flynn." So, the same Trump on Twitter as we've always had. I have a couple different feelings about this. In one sense, Michael Flynn is a war criminal for his actions going back to Afghanistan during the Obama years, when, with the Stanley McChrystal team. And then I think even after, Flynn was a part of the night raids they were carrying out there and using bad data, kicking down people's doors in the middle of the night. And then, basically, at best, you have Breonna Taylor situations all over the place where people react to their door being kicked in and shoot back, and then you waste an entire family that way. And then worst case, it was just complete slaughters. And Flynn was heavily involved in that. And for that reason, the guy should go to jail. But that's not what he got a pardon for. His pardon comes, I believe, as for lying to the FBI. I'm not sure if Trump included any of the other related Russiagate stuff in there. But this pardon comes from the Russiagate whole narrative, and it doesn't seem like Flynn really did anything wrong there. And so, as the basically designate of President-elect Donald Trump, so imagine that we're now in this part of the Trump transition where it seems pretty clear that he's won. I believe actually this happened after the Electoral College voted. So Trump is officially president-elect, and Mike Flynn is, to whatever official title this is, the designate to be National Security Advisor. As in that role, he talked to the Russian ambassador about a couple of things. One was if Russia would veto a UN Security Council resolution that was targeting Israel for settlement expansion. And I guess targeting probably isn't the right word. It's condemning Israel. It wasn't necessarily a resolution with a lot of teeth, but nonetheless, it was going to shine a negative light on Israel for their occupation and settlement expansion. The Obama administration, who was still the president, had decided at the time that they were actually not going to veto this resolution, which, if none of the other 4 permanent members of the UN Security Council, and that would have been the UK, France, China, or Russia, if they don't veto it and then the Security Council votes for it, it was going to pass. And that's what was going to happen. And so on behalf of Israel, Flynn had asked Russia if they would veto this resolution, which they didn't end up doing. And so, maybe there is some sketchy stuff there on behalf of Israel. But what they went after him for actually was Flynn asking the Russians not to overreact to Obama putting new sanctions and expelling Russian ambassadors from the U.S. Because the incoming Trump administration was going to have a different policy, and it was all based on the bogus election rigging hoax stuff anyways, right? And so as far as it goes, it was a pretty good act of diplomacy for Flynn, minus the Israel stuff, and it did seem to help to not make the tensions with Russia worse. Now, after Trump becomes president, I mean, he ramps things up all over the place, sanctions and spelling ambassadors, all kinds of crazy anti-Russia policies, getting out of nuclear deals and stuff like that. But at least at this point in time, it was a way to slow down the escalating crisis between the U.S. and Russia. And so Flynn in that role did a good thing. Now the FBI wanted to go after him for a violation of the Logan Act, which would basically say that, a private citizen can't represent the US government overseas and stuff like that. And that's what Flynn did. No, I don't think anybody's ever been prosecuted with it. I don't think it's exactly constitutional. And I don't think Flynn actually violated it because he was, the incoming national security advisor. He had been designated to that position. Um, so, the FBI then questions him on that, and they catch Flynn in a lie, and then they use that lie to hold it over Flynn's head, and he ends up pleading guilty to that lie. He then later rescinds the plea as more information comes out that shows the investigation against him was bogus. So yeah, they caught him lying, but even the FBI knew that they really shouldn't be investigating him for this. And in fact, the agents who end up questioning him even speculated if the goal was to catch him in a lie. And it wasn't necessarily to uncover the truth. It was just they thought they were going to get him on something like that. And that's what ended up happening. Now, there's another little piece of this story here that I guess is a little bit more criminal on behalf of Flynn, and that was he had started this Flynn consulting group, and not only was the senior Michael Flynn on it, but also the junior, his son, was involved in this consulting group. And then he had written some papers in 2016, or at least signed off on them. I don't know about written. That were requested from the Flynn group on behalf of Turkey, and then he didn't register as a foreign agent. So I think it actually was a FAR Act violation, and there are problems with that, but that's not what the FBI was going after him for. There was some speculation, though, that the FBI essentially leveraged that. Because it involved his son as well, because it was the Flynn Consulting Group, not just, Michael Flynn himself. And that could have been part of the reason that Flynn pled guilty to the lying to FBI charges. So, just a really interesting story here with Michael Flynn, somebody who definitely should be in jail, but not for this. Honestly, I guess I'm not quite sure about this pardon. I think it's actually gonna hurt the narrative. I think it's Trump pardoning Flynn on his way out the door is going to give it the look of a conspiracy. And like I said, I don't care if Flynn's in jail for. He deserves to be there. And I think this gives it a little bit of an appearance of a conspiracy on Trump's behalf. And so it might actually fuel some of the Russiagate hysteria and everything like that. I'm a little bit concerned there. And then, Donald Trump on his way out here should be pardoning people, but it should be people like Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, Ross Ulbricht. For people, that Ross is probably the name I've talked about least on the show. He was allegedly the founder of the Silk Road. Dread Pirate Scott, I believe, is the name of the account in question. And whether or not some illegal activity occurred on that site while he was the admin or not, winds up with him doing 2+ life sentences and having his entire wealth stolen by the FBI agents and stuff like that. His trial was a complete fraud. It was absolutely absurd. So he's another, name to add to the list. One of the unfortunate things about Trump is that I don't think he realized how he could have used the pardon. And man, if I were him, I would have been pardoning everybody in jail because of Biden's crime bill leading up to the 2020 election. But he can certainly do it now, and that would I think be a real insult to Joe Biden, saying that, hey, I gotta get all you guys out of prison before the new president comes and locks you up forever. And so I do think, there's great things that Donald Trump could do with the pardon on the way out the door. And Michael Flynn isn't my top choice for that, though. So with that, I want to just take a quick second to thank the sponsor of today's show, which is Paloma Verde. I actually got my CBD salt gels right here, and that's what they do at Paloma Verde. They make different CBD products. You could get extracts, you could get gummies, all different doses, creams, topical stuff for your pet. Does all kinds of different things for you. If you need, to take the edge off, the holidays are a stressful time. 2020 more than any, a lot of people out of work. Government won't let you work. They won't give you any money. Things are difficult. Things are tough. You know, if you want for that reason, go ahead. Or if you're one of those essential workers out there busting your ass every day, never getting a break and everything like that, well, then maybe it'll help you to with some back pain or stuff like that. So think about checking out Paloma Verde store.com. Paloma Verde store.com is a website. And once you go there, you can learn more about CBD and buy their great products. And when you do, you spend $75. You use the promo code PEACE, PEACE. You get a great 25% discount. Now let's get back to the show. All right, I want to spend, I think, the bulk of today's show talking about these two characters, really. One is Antony Blinken's, Tony Blinken's, and the other is Michele Flournoy. Antony Blinken is the designate to be Secretary of State, and Michele Flournoy, the Secretary of Defense. The speculation was actually that Florinoy would get Secretary of Defense, and I have been talking about how this is disturbing on the show. Blinken actually was thought to be maybe National Security Advisor or something like that, but he ends up getting the role of Secretary of State. He may not be as bad of a pick as Susan Rice, which was rumored to be the pick, but nonetheless, I'm going to go through here and explain why this is not a great thing for us. And, you know, I think these will be Biden's war pigs here. So, starting with Blinken, he supported the Iraq war and stood by it for quite a long time while working for Joe Biden in 2002. One of the reasons this is significant is because of the role Joe Biden played in the lead up to the Iraq war in 2002. You know, there you had certainly the Republicans, you know, the Cheney White House, the National Security State, all pushing the lies that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. But at the time, you had the Senate that was led by Democrats, and Joe Biden was head of, I believe it was a Foreign Affairs Committee. It could have been a different one, though, but it was a powerful Senate committee, and it had the ability to hold hearings on the, you know, lead up to the Iraq war prior to passing the 2002 authorization for use of military force, which is what allowed George Bush to go in and overthrow Saddam Hussein. And so while chairing his committee, you know, Biden had the ability to bring on skeptics like Scott Ritter to explain to members of Congress and to testify and answer questions around the idea that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. And Scott Ritter was a former weapons inspector that was in Iraq who knew for a fact that they weren't there, and he wanted to go to Congress and testify to that fact, and was blocked by Joe Biden. And even if it wasn't Scott Ritter, there were other skeptics at the time who could have at least been invited onto the committee hearings to make the case, if not to the senators, at least to the American people, to try to turn more people against the Iraq war. But what Joe Biden did was put on more of like a little bit of a, you know, dog and pony show that allowed the people who believed Saddam had weapons of mass destruction to come to his committee and testify to that fact and actually end up pushing the war. Now, you know, in the U.S. at least, you have kind of an interesting political dynamic where if a Democrat, you know, is supportive of something that's being pushed by a Republican president, then that adds a lot of weight to it, especially when it's important Democrat like a committee head that Joe Biden was at that time. And so I think, you know, on top of just being in the position to do it, how it works out politically in the U.S. when you're in the opposition party, you really got to stand against the bad things the government is doing, because if you don't, it looks like, oh, well, if the Republicans and the Democrats are the most bitter rivals and enemies ever, and they both agree on this thing, well, then it must be pretty good if they're both gonna, you know, put their differences aside and move along with it. And so that's where we get our start with Blinken. I believe Michele Flournoy was actually working in the government at the time, and again, supportive of the war. By the way, I have this article here from Jacobin magazine. So this isn't like some libertarian outlet whatsoever. This is, you know, say far left Jacobin, titled "Joe Biden's new national security pits are very troubling." by Julia Rock and Andrew Perez. And I definitely recommend checking out that article. I used that article. There was one by Dan Cohen at the Gray Zone. Kevin Gastola wrote one for I believe the Gray Zone, if it wasn't Consortium News on it. There's been a few more. Brett Wilkins, we published one by him at antiwar.com. Danny Sherjan's written on it, so a lot of great stuff. Moving on with Bilkins here, one of the other things that he did is he founded West End Execs, and this is more recently in 2018, but this was with Michele Flournoy. And so to talk about West End Execs for a second here, is their slogan was to bring the situation room to the boardroom. And basically they were selling their influence. These were all Obama administration officials who were then out of government. But they had a lot of influence, and I'm sure a lot of companies figured that Democrats would win, if not in 2020, in 2024. And so, they got hired, and they brought the, Obama cabinet or his officials into different boardrooms around the country. It seems that they were hired at the very least by Google, and that was a report for The Intercept. And while they keep their client list secret, the Prospect did a great report on West End Execs and reported that the military-industrial complex in Israel funded this outlet as well, and purchased their services, which again are kind of hard to tell what they are. And so this collection of former Obama officials took a bunch of money from the weapons makers, and so now that they're in power, guess who they're going to be paying back. More on Bilkin. He did support the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and I believe continues to support it, which is great. This is probably the best thing that Joe Biden could do on foreign policy, or extending New START, which Bilkin also supports, which is the nuclear agreement with Russia. But specifically, the Iran nuclear deal, it's going to be something that that Biden's going to have to invest some political capital in. He's going to have to really say that I want to get this done, because even his Democratic allies are saying that Iran needs to do more for the U.S. to get back in the deal, which isn't going to happen because the U.S. broke the deal under the Trump administration, which really hurt, the politics in Iran as far as it goes, with the parties and the more moderates that supported the deal. Well, they lost a lot of, power and legitimacy because they signed this deal with the United States, and then the U.S. backed out on it, and it absolutely wrecked the Iranian economy when the U.S. did that. You also had the issue that the U.S. kept on and expanded the sanctions and the maximum pressure campaign against Iran, even during this COVID pandemic, which seems to have caused a lot of problems in Iran. Now, it's great that Biden and his Secretary of State are supportive of this. The problem is I don't know if they're supportive of it in we want it to happen, or they're supportive of it in the way the Obama administration was about Obamacare, where they came in, they said, we'll get this done. If they're not insistent that they will get it done, it may not. You have again, I point out powerful people like Bob Menendez and now even Chris Coons, who are both Democratic senators, saying that Iran needs to do more to get back in the deal. And if that's the case, then they're not willing, obviously, to do more because it was the U.S. that broke the deal. Then they may, run into some problems trying to re-enter this agreement with Iran. And again, I think this is a case where the politics may play out really poorly, where the Republicans are going to say, look, Biden's trying to give them everything because we know the Democrats love the Iranians, and they still won't get back in the deal. Look how terrible those Iranians are. And so I think this could actually make the situation with Iran even worse, again, unless they're very invested in getting the deal done. I point out extending New START, that seems to be a good thing. Daniel Larison wrote this one for the Quincy Institute. Usually he's at the American Conservative, but this was at the Quincy Institute. He wrote up one saying that, hey, these are the two good things about Antony Blinken. Let's see, we have here, he wanted to do more in Syria and was behind Obama's Redline Strategy. So this Redline Strategy was what the Houthis did to try to corner Obama into getting involved in Syria, not just supporting them, what they called the moderate rebels, but more aggressively trying to remove the Assad regime with actual U.S. warfare against him. And so what they said is that if chemical weapons are used, the U.S. will get involved. There was then a false flag attack in 2013, claiming the Assad government carried out a chemical weapons strike. It was later debunked. Most of the critical debunking was done by Theodore Postal, who is a MIT professor on rockets and all kinds of other stuff. He said that no, that there's no way that the Assad government could have carried out this attack by the alleged munitions used. This was the case where as many as 1,500 Syrians did die from a sarin attack, and it was likely carried out by the, what we would call, or Obama was calling at the time, moderates that the U.S. was backing. So this was the Obama policy that Blinken's really supported and pushed. It was, the policy through the Obama administration, and he kept pushing to do more. And since leaving government, has said that he would like to do more, and that the mistake was not doing more. And so that meant going war directly with the Assad regime in Syria. And it's kind of crazy to hold this position now, realizing that the Assad regime was overthrown. The most powerful force on the ground in Syria was probably the Islamic State, and if not, it was Al-Qaeda. And so that they're still endorsing this kind of regime change, even when they realize how horrible it would go, just shows what kind of complete nutcases that these people are. I think one of the things we'll see with both Florinoy and Blinken is they really believe that they could shape the world. And it's, that they think that they could drop the right number of bombs in the right places in Syria to make it so that, that country moves more towards democracy. But as we've seen with intervention after intervention in the Middle East, and several that this guy personally supported, that's never what they turn into. They turn into humanitarian crises. If the leader ends up getting overthrown, worse people come to power. And if the leader doesn't get overthrown, they end up with more power. So I think that's all I have on Syria, although he did also praise Trump for bombing Syria during the Trump administration. So just, to add to the horrible things that this guy has supported. He favored war in Libya. I'm not sure if he's, walked that back or recanted that. But again, it's one of those things where he now has the benefit of hindsight, not, in 2013 favoring the redline policy and going into Syria. But he now knows that Libya was an absolute failure, that we did what he wanted to do in Syria, that we used enough force to force the leader out of power, and turned into a failed state with open slavery. The Tuareg, the black population of Libya, was particularly targeted and cleansed from the country largely. The migrant crisis happened, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people dying in the sea. Human trafficking, the worst crime kind, is rampant there. And yet he still supports these kind of regime changes. It's not that, he sees Libya now and sees what has happened and goes, oh my God, how could I have supported this? I made such a huge mistake. And thank God now I'm Secretary of State because it's diplomacy. I'm going to arrange talks between different groups and stuff like that, but no more war. But he seems to want more war. He also supported Yemen, although he walked that back in 2018. But we do know that there's a lot of Obama administration officials who are worried that they could be prosecuted for the war crimes that have happened in Yemen. And so that may be why he's walked that back, to try to cover his ass a little bit on that. The last thing I have is on Blinken's here is that he played a central role in the Ukraine coup. He was, I believe, the national security advisor to Joe Biden at the time. And so he was NSA to the vice president, not the president. But Joe Biden was playing a central role and a key role in, the coup in Ukraine. And we know this because Victoria Nuland, who was, I believe, the ambassador to the EU, but she was in a central role in Obama's Ukraine policy. And then Biden, also said it when he leveraged the $1 billion IMF loan to get Viktor Shokin fired. And so, Biden was a central player, and so his national security advisor Bilkins was too. This coup ended up being absolutely terrible. It started a civil war. It led to Russia annexing the Crimean Peninsula, and then the people of the Crimean Peninsula supporting that annexation in a referendum. We still have Eastern Ukraine in open rebellion to the central government there, although fighting isn't on absurd levels in Ukraine. There's still cross-border fire and people still do die there. And, we've talked about escalating through the Trump policy. And in fact, Bilkins pushed Trump and I believe praised Trump when he decided to sell weapons to Ukraine, even though it was shown by this point that there were neo-Nazi elements within Ukraine's military, mainly the Azov battalion, kind of joined in with the National Guard there, and yet we armed them anyways. Moving on to Michele Flournoy, I had mentioned already her co-founding of West End Execs with Antony Blinken there, but she also worked at the Boston Consulting Group, which is a big think tank and military industrial connected thing. And then she also helped found the Center for New American Security, known better as CNAS. In 2014 and 2019, CNAS received $9 billion either from the U.S. government or the military-industrial complex. And so this is a think tank that's heavily funded by the weapons makers. And look, I mean, I guess you'd take, like, if Raytheon wanted to send me $1 million check to sit here and talk about how we don't need Raytheon products all day, I guess I wouldn't complain too much. However, that's not what this lady does. She takes that check and then she advocates to buy more and more Raytheon or Lockheed products all day long, including, being part of CNAS and advocating for this massive buildup in B-21 bombers. I believe these are going to be made by Boeing or Lockheed, but, everybody gets their fingers in these pies. And initially they're going to have 100, but now they want to have 200. And I'm sure this plane will be loaded up with problems just like the other ones were. I'll take a second to note that if you want to get to some more of the details on Michele Flournoy's involvement in different weapons programs in the Center for New American Security, there's a good article by the Project for Government Oversight, POGO, on Michele Flournoy, and it goes into her background in extensive details. Michele Flournoy wants deeper ties between the Pentagon and Silicon Valley. And so basically she wants to, buy up their employees and, deeper ties. And this is because she's a big advocate for like asymmetrical kind of warfare or unmanned warfare. So she wants the U.S. not to like get involved like they did in Iraq anywhere, but rather to, hover drones above Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, and all these countries all day long. And when we want to be able to drop bombs on them or carry out, cyber operations against Russia, China, and Iran, stuff like that. Although she's not opposed to, big military spending because she also wants the U.S. to have the ability to wipe out the Chinese Navy and every Chinese ship in the South China Sea within 72 hours, which is just an insane, because it's every Chinese ship. It's an insane war crime policy, but it's also going to require, a huge amount of financial buildup in military spending to be able to achieve something like that. She was one of the people that helped Obama escalate in Afghanistan. So here we have to go back to 2009, 2010, the Obama administration takes over. Obama had ran on this being the good war, Afghanistan being the good war, and was looking at different levels to, increase troop levels in Afghanistan, and ended up going for a pretty big option. 100,000 U.S. troops end up being in Afghanistan. Most of the troops that die, U.S. troops that died during the Afghan war, have died during this surge, and Michele Flournoy was behind that. So, unfortunately, it doesn't look like Trump's going to be able to get everybody out of Afghanistan. We know that this lady likes the surge policy, and so if Trump leaves 2,500 troops, seems like a level that Florinoy could surge from if that's what she wanted to do. So lots and lots of reasons to be concerned about this lady. In 1996, she, I believe, co-authored the Quadrilateral Defense Review and called for global dominance. This was during the Clinton administration. In 2002, she was very critical of anti-war Democrats and pushed for more defense spending and wanted to add 25,000 new troops a year to the military. And then in 2010, in a new quadrilateral review, she pushed the more drone, unmanned, and covert warfare. And this includes like the cyber warfare and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, the pits look bad at this point. I mean, it could end up being not that bad. You know, you never know what happens when people get in power. But if their history is any record, it's not a good sign. I do want to move on and talk about one more person. And we have an article here from Brett Wilkins at antiwar.com. And it is about the new director of national intelligence for Joe Biden. And that is Avril Haines. There's three things to point out with Avril Haines that are truly, truly disturbing. And that is she supported and I believe helped write the like legal theory needed to carry out Obama's drone program. And so this was the idea that the US in essentially any country at any time, if they thought somebody needed to die, they could go fly a drone, drop a Hellfire missile and kill them. It didn't matter how many innocent people died. Nobody was ever held responsible for it. And she was one of the key architects of that. So huge war criminal, should be buried under some prison somewhere, but unfortunately, she's going to be in one of the most important intelligence roles in the world empire. She also supported Gina Haspel's nomination to become the CIA director. Haspel's nomination was, and confirmation was notable and important because she was heavily involved in the CIA torture program and now gets to run the agency. And so, this is why it was so important when Obama came into office to prosecute all these people, right? Because they're involved in torture. And if you prosecute them and they're all in jail, I could guarantee you they never become CIA director and director of national intelligence, but rather, they didn't get prosecuted and now they're in all these positions. And then Avril Haines also had a role in the torture program. It was a supervising role, and I guess helping to cover up on the legal end, and then specifically helping the CIA to cover up the spying on the Senate Intelligence Committee when they were looking into the CIA torture program. And so this is great. Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is this big advocate, and I guess not advocate, but this big allower of mass surveillance and an apologizer for it, and has continued to push it. Her office was actually legally spied on by the CIA, right? So then she takes a little bit of offense to it, but it's now this lady Avril Haines that came in and cleaned that up and made sure nobody went to jail. Avril Haines, I don't think her character is in the report, which is that Amazon Prime movie with Kylo Ren that goes in and talks about the CIA torture program, but she's involved in that, and then they get into the spying on that actual committee too. She also worked for Planeteer, this according to The Intercept. I guess not worked for, consulted for. It's unclear what she did, but this is one of those big data mining firms that, like, when you had the mass protests going on in countries, they do the data mining and then pass that information to the police or whoever they're contracted to work with on like where the protests are going on. There are some interesting quotes here about why Avril Haines is a terrible choice, and they're all from leftists. So I just wanted to read a couple of them that Brett Wilkins put together in his article. The first is from Code Pink, so I'm assuming like Medea Benjamin are one of those people. Appointing a woman to be director of national intelligence does not justify, atone, or excuse the U.S. intelligence community's murderous drone and violent counterterrorism strategies. Again, these are the things that Avril Haines pushed. everybody's saying, oh, she's a woman, that's why people don't want her to be there. No, it's because she's a war criminal. Danny Shergen, who's former U.S. Army major and also a writer for antiwar.com, says Uncle Joe's inbound nieces and nephews recall Aesop's fabled, "You are judged by the company you keep." Meet Avril Haines, National Security Team CIA-DNI prospect, signed letter backing Trump's nom of torture complicit Gina Haspel. Dan Cohen, who's a writer at the Gray Zone. Avril Haines gave full-throated support for Trump's nomination of torture queen Gina Haspel. And then Sarah Lazare says Avril Haines as director of national intelligence is not good. She was one of the authors of Obama's presidential policy guidance, the infamous drone policy playbook that made targeted killings all over the world a normal part of U.S. policy. So this is, I think, what we're looking at in the Biden administration. It may even be a worse foreign policy than Trump's. And, things could change, and I'll continue to break down. I think we also know who the ambassador to the UN will be. I'll try to have a little bit about her on next week's shows. Moving on, there's just a couple other stories I want to talk about here. This one by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Guaido, that's Juan Guaido, hopes to maintain bipartisan support for Venezuela regime change. Juan Guaido is the self-proclaimed president of Venezuela. No, really, this guy proclaimed himself to be president in a press conference event with other opposition figures to Maduro, and some of them were so shocked by it and so appalled that they actually got up and walked off the stage. So it wasn't even like a full-throated endorsement from the opposition to Maduro, but this guy proclaimed himself to be president, and then the U.S. proclaimed him to be president, and so now he has a whole bunch of money to run around and say that he's president, although he has no actual power in Venezuela still. And I don't even think just sits in the basement of some jail. I mean, you could imagine that the Democrats would expect Joe Biden to arrest Donald Trump if he kept claiming to be president, was running all over the country saying that I'm the rightful president and trying to rouse the military to support him or something like that. But this is what Guaido's run around Venezuela doing. And he's expecting that he's going to get support from no matter who becomes president. Just reading off who Biden's Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State will be and their past policies, I don't think we should be surprised at all that the Biden administration is likely to maintain this policy, if not push it forward, and continue this effort for regime change in Venezuela. The Center for Economic Policy Research, CEPR, Jeffrey Satz put out a study with them, and this was just the first year of U.S. sanctions, but thought the sanctions had contributed to an additional 40,000 deaths in Venezuela. This policy has been going on for a few years, so the deaths are just going to continue to pile up. And I guess it'll just be a matter of time before we hear a Biden administration official saying, yeah, we started a couple 100,000 Venezuelan kids to death, but we think the price is worth it to overthrow Maduro. All right. Last story I have here. Just going to do this one real quick. But it's a story that really bothers me. And it happened in the UK in 2019, where you had a young man. His last name, I think, was Dunn. I forget his first name. He was Harry Dunn. He was riding his motorcycle, and an American woman ran him over. Driving down the wrong side of the road, ran him over. Not exactly sure she was intoxicated, brand new to England, really confused. I have no idea. Her name is Anne Sokolos, maybe. And she was the wife of a U.S. official. After the accident happened, she's kind of escorted out of the country by the U.S., and the U.S. refuses to bring her back and says, oh, she's the wife of an official. And now the U.K. court has ruled that because she's the wife of the official, she receives diplomatic immunity. It's really disturbing that Americans get to literally run over people in foreign countries and get away with it. Turns out this lady is also in the CIA, so that might have something to do with it too. It reminds me a lot of this story out of Pakistan where you had somebody in the U.S. military. He was an officer. He was driving drunk. He ran over some dude. I'm sure he was just working his ass off in Pakistan, killed him, and got away with it. And so these kind of things happen with some frequency where the U.S. is able to kill people overseas, not just with drones, but with cars or whatever the hell you want. As long as you're connected enough with the U.S. government, you'll probably get away with it. All right, that's where I'm wrapping for today. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving week. And again, you got to do something enjoyable for the holiday. I don't know if people are going out for Black Friday or what. But if you're doing something for Black Friday, get some good deals. And if you got any savings that you could pass along, think about donating to this show. We're at Patreon. They're just conflicts of interest. I'm looking to sign up for a few new subscription services and set up PayPal or some e-currency, give me your Bitcoin or something like that. So I'll have that on the show in the coming weeks and stick in the show notes page and stuff. But donate to the show if you can. But if not, please take the time to share it, get out there some new listeners. Be back with new shows next week.